My name is Eric, and I work part-time as a food delivery driver in San Francisco. It's a tough job, but it pays the bills, and in this city, that's saying something. Most nights are uneventful, just dropping off meals at apartments or houses and moving on to the next order. But there was one night a few months ago that I can't shake from my mind. It still haunts me every time I get a delivery notification. It was a Friday night, and I'd already been working for a few hours when a large order came through. It was from an upscale apartment building on the outskirts of the city. I'd never delivered there before, but I figured it would be easy, probably just some tech guy pulling a late night at home. The instructions were simple. Leave the food at the door of apartment 5B. No need to knock, just take a picture and leave. When I arrived, the building looked almost too quiet, especially for a Friday night. It had a sleek, modern design, all glassed and steel, but there was something off about it. The lobby was empty, and the elevator creaked slightly as I rode up to the 5th floor. I tried to brush it off as just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired. I found the door to 5B and set the food down as instructed. The hallway was eerily silent, with only the hum of the elevator in the distance. I took out my phone to snap a picture of the delivery, but as I did, I noticed something in the photo that made my heart skip a beat. There was a shadowy figure standing just inside the door. It was faint, almost like it was part of the darkness in the apartment, but it was there, clearly outlined in the photo. I stared at the picture for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or maybe someone was actually home but didn't want to be seen. I decided to knock, just in case. I knocked softly at first, then a little louder, but no one answered. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me, and my instincts were screaming at me to leave. So I did. I quickly walked back to the elevator, feeling a strange sense of relief as the doors closed and I descended back to the lobby. As I got back into my car, my phone buzzed with a new message. I'd assumed it was the customer thanking me for the delivery, but when I opened it, my blood ran cold. The message said, "I saw you knock." It wasn't from the same number that placed the order, and there was no name attached to it. Just those 4 words. I looked back at the building, but everything was still and dark. It was like no one was there at all. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just a prank, but that sense of unease stuck with me. Over the next week, the same customer continued placing orders, always with the same instructions. Leave the food at the door of 5B, no need to knock. And each time, after I drop off the order, I'd get another message. "I'm watching you. I liked your jacket today. Why don't you come inside?" By this point, I was genuinely freaked out. I started to dread getting any orders from that building. I tried reporting the number to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do. It was probably just a bored kid messing with me, they said. But something didn't add up. Finally, after one last terrifying message, "Come closer next time," I decided to do some investigating on my own. I found out that the apartment had been vacant for over a year. The previous tenant had moved out after a fire had damaged part of the unit. No one had lived there since, and it was currently listed for sale, empty. When I heard that, a chill ran through me. How could someone be ordering food from an apartment that had been vacant for so long? And who was sending those messages? I stopped taking orders from that area altogether. I didn't care about the money anymore. I just wanted to forget about the whole thing. The messages eventually stopped, but every time I drive past that building, I can't help but feel like someone is watching me. It's like a presence, just out of sight, is waiting for me to come back. I don't know who or what it was, but I'll never deliver to that place again. Sometimes, late at night, I still check my phone, half expecting another message to pop up, reminding me that some doors should never be opened. My name is Jacob, and I've been a food delivery driver in Miami for almost 2 years now. I've seen all kinds of things. People answering the door in their underwear, dogs trying to snatch the food out of my hands, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what happened that one night at the old motel. It was a quiet Thursday night. The kind where you can hear the distant hum of the city, but everything feels strangely still. I was about to call it a night when I got an order for a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town. I'd delivered to some sketchy places before, but this motel was different. The kind of place that makes your skin crawl as soon as you pull up. The order was pretty standard, just a burger and fries, nothing out of the ordinary. When I got to the motel, I found the room, number 12, and knocked on the door. After a moment, an elderly man answered. He looked frail, his eyes cloudy with confusion. He stared at me like he didn't understand why I was there. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Your food, sir," I said, holding up the bag. "It's already paid for." He looked down at the bag, then back at me, and shook his head. "I didn't order any food," he mumbled. I checked the receipt. The address was right. Room 12, just like the one he was standing in. I showed it to him, and he squinted at it, clearly trying to make sense of things. "I live here alone," he said slowly. "I don't eat much these days." I was about to apologize and leave when he suddenly asked, "Could you help me with something?" His tone was so desperate that I couldn't refuse. "Sure," I said. "What do you need?" "My nephew," he started, his voice trembling. "He's been staying in the room next door, number 11. I haven't heard from him in days. Could you check on him for me? I'm too weak to get out much these days." I hesitated, but something in his eyes made me agree. I walked over to room 11 and knocked. There was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. I looked back at the old man, who was watching me with a look of pleading in his eyes. "Maybe he's out," I said, but the old man shook his head. "He doesn't leave much. Could you just try the door?" Feeling uneasy, I reached for the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned easily, and the door creaked open. A wave of foul air hit me, stale and sickening. My stomach churned as I stepped inside. The room was dark, with just a sliver of light coming from a cracked window. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was a stench so foul that it made me gag, like something had been rotting in there for days. I fumbled for the light switch, and when the room flooded with light, I wished I hadn't found it. There, lying on the bed, was a young man, probably in his late 20s. His skin was grayish, eyes half open but unseeing. It was clear he had been dead for a while. What shocked me even more were the food wrappers scattered around him. Bags from fast food places, boxes of pizza, all from Deliveries. They were stacked on the nightstand, piled on the floor, some even on the bed beside him. I stepped back, my mind racing. How long had he been dead? And who had been ordering all this food? As I looked around, I noticed his phone on the bed, the screen still on. I picked it up with trembling hands. The screen was open to a food delivery app with several recent orders still in progress. Some of the orders were from earlier that day. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to piece together what was happening. Someone had been ordering food to this room, even though the guy had been dead for days. But who and why? I rushed out of the room, barely holding it together as I called the police. They arrived quickly, and the motel was soon swarming with officers. I gave my statement, but I couldn't get the image of that room out of my head. The decaying body, the endless food deliveries. The old man watched as the police took over, his expression vacant, as if he had expected this outcome. The police later told me the young man had been dead for at least a week. The most chilling part, they couldn't trace where the orders had come from. The app logs showed they were placed using the dead man's phone, but the timestamps didn't match the time of death. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that someone else was behind those orders, someone who was watching from afar, keeping the deliveries going long after the man had died. I stopped delivering to that area, but every time I pass a motel, I think about that night, wondering who or what was waiting in room 11. My name is Tyler, and I've been a food delivery driver for almost a year. Most nights are the same: pick up, drop off, repeat. But one night, I had an experience that I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, and I was working a late shift just outside of Houston. Business was steady, and I was hoping to make a bit of extra cash before the weekend. Around 10:30 p.m., I got an order from a place I didn't recognize. The location was far out of town, down a long, winding road that seemed to stretch on forever. The directions weren't clear, but the GPS led me there, so I figured it was just another out-of-the-way drop-off. As I drove, the houses became fewer, and the streetlights disappeared altogether. The road turned from pavement to gravel, and soon it was just me, my car, and the darkness. I started to get that uneasy feeling in my gut, the kind that makes you want to turn around, but I was already too far in. The GPS recalculated, directing me onto an even narrower road that seemed more like a dirt path than a street. I followed the instructions, feeling more uneasy with every turn. The trees on either side of the road grew thicker, and the branches formed a canopy overhead, blocking out what little moonlight there was. Eventually, the GPS announced that I had arrived, but there was nothing around. No house, no lights, nothing but the dense forest. Confused, I stopped the car and checked the app. That's when I got a message from the customer: "Keep driving." A chill ran down my spine. The message didn't sit right with me. Why would I keep driving when the GPS said I was already at the destination? The road ahead looked even more treacherous, so I decided I'd had enough. I put the car in reverse, but just as I was about to turn around, the engine sputtered and died. Panic set in. I tried restarting the car, but the engine wouldn't turn over. My heart pounded in my chest as I frantically twisted the key in the ignition, but it was no use. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. The night was completely silent, except for the sound of my own breathing. That's when I saw them. Two figures emerged from the trees, barely visible in darkness. They were wearing masks, the kind you see in horror movies, and they were holding knives. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen in fear, staring at them as they slowly approached my car. Somehow, I snapped out of it. I grabbed my phone, opened the door, and bolted into the woods, not caring which direction I was headed. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps crunching on the leaves and twigs as they chased me deeper into the forest. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was the only thing keeping me going. I ran for what felt like hours, dodging trees and tripping over roots until I couldn't hear them anymore. My lungs burned and my legs were numb, but I kept moving, terrified that they were still close. The woods were pitch black, and every shadow looked like it could be one of those masked men. Eventually, I found myself on the edge of a highway, my clothes torn and my body covered in scratches. I stumbled onto the road, waving my arms like a madman, praying for someone to stop. Finally, a truck pulled over, and the driver, a middle-aged guy with a kind face, helped me into the cab. He asked what had happened, but I could barely get the words out. All I could do was beg him to take me to the nearest police station. When we got there, I told the police everything. About the order, the GPS, the masked men, but they never found them. The location I had been led to didn't exist on any map, and the number used to place the order was a burner phone with no traceable information. My car was found a few days later, stripped and abandoned miles from where I'd left it. I don't work as a delivery driver anymore. I can't. Every time I get behind the wheel, I'm back on that deserted road, hearing the crunch of leaves behind me, knowing someone is out there, watching, waiting.